Thank you, Matt. Matt, so we've got 2 hours, right? Two, what? How much time is this? 30 minutes? I doubt that we can get through a comprehensive set of best practices in 30 minutes. I mean, that's really like taking all of your Twilio swag and trying to jam it into your suitcase tonight. I mean, it's just not going to happen. This is great. There's a phone on top of his head there. I thought it was just perfect. So what we're going to try to do is jam through as much as possible, but I have some questions before we get into this authentication checklist. How many of you have been to any of the Authy sessions during the Signal conference? Okay, a good chunk of you. How many of you haven't? Okay, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time making sure you see what Authy is in an end user perspective at some point as we talk about the channels, so you get a better appreciation for it. But it's going to be a quick summary. You might want to catch up on some of the great sessions we've had. Yesterday we had a session with ExoStar, very high security implementation of Authy, and a session with Datto where they build everything and that they still chose us. So Authy two-factor authentication best practices checklist. We're gonna identify all the different channels that we offer and when you should even do two-factor authentication. That's part of the decisions that you need to go through. You need to figure out what the user experience is once they're enrolled. What's the steady state going to be? How often are you going to prompt it? Under what circumstances? We need to figure out how we're going to get these users registered and registered in a way that hopefully encourages them to adopt the more secure options that we offer. How many people were just in B. Burns' session, the last session? Small handful. He set the stage really, really well for the fact that we have a declining identity assurance on SMS as a two-factor delivery channel. Doesn't mean it's not good. Lots of people still doing it, but you should be thinking about when it crosses that line of viability. You need to figure out what to do when something goes wrong for your user. It's very important that you can find a secure way to let a user recover, maybe in a self-service way, so they don't even have to call the help desk. You want to make sure that they have some redundancy in their two-factor solution. And then we've got this new feature that I'm going to show a little bit about, what to do with context. Context is something that can help you feel even more sure that you trust this user and that they're in the right place, the right time with their two-factor device and with their compute device. And then finally, we're going to jam through these minor little issues of error handling, testing, logging, reporting, just some odds and ends. All right, so that's what we're up to. So Authy has several different two-factor authentication channels. We actually started out a long time ago with Authy One Code. This is an SMS and voice delivery channel for one-time passwords. And we built upon this over the years. We're laser focused on two-factor authentication, so we're constantly innovating in this space. And soon after, we developed a mobile application that could generate one-time passwords offline for a variety of different applications. A little bit like RSA Secure ID, a little bit like Google Authenticator, but with none of the user frustrations of those technologies. And then a few years ago, actually at Signal 2 years ago, we were talking about Authy One Touch. This is the latest in push authentication. It's the best user experience. It also happens to be the most secure. So obviously, the channel on the left is a lowest common denominator. It works for just about everybody. If you've got a phone number, you can work with one code, even if it's not a mobile phone. The two on the right, this requires them to download something. It could be our public app store Authy app, which is available on Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, and iOS. And you can mix and match those things so that you can have more than one in case one of them was left at the bar last night or fell in the toilet. But you really have the ability to give your users ways to succeed in the way they want and still deliver a much higher level of security than that username and password. All right, so at this point, let's actually give a quick demo just so that people have seen kind of how these different channels might manifest itself. Now, this is a super abbreviated demo. If you want to see a more thorough, thoughtful discussion about everything that's happening, we've got a few other recordings that you can watch on our website. So let's go ahead and sign in to Owlmart here. And in this particular implementation, we've decided to offer a whole bunch of options to the users. Sorry if that's a little bit small. We've given them a bunch of buttons. It's important to recognize that you control the entire user experience inside your application. We're a REST API from your perspective. You decide which things to expose and in what order and how we do it. And that's one of the decisions that you need to make when you're considering this. But they all belong to a single registration. You can offer all of these channels to your users if they have the right solution. We can send an SMS, and there comes the SMS, and I can see that my code is 1616018. So that's the kind of the traditional approach, and I can just come in here and type that in. Or I could use soft token. I could come into the Authy app and find the right guy here, whichever one is there's Owlmart. I can find Owlmart and I can type that token in. Or I could send a one-touch request, which will send a push notification to any of my registered devices, just like that soft token can be on more than one device. This will send a push notification. It works just like email. It works just like Facebook notifications. You get it, you click on it, it takes you to that thing, and in this case, it gives you a whole bunch of really useful information to help determine, hey, was this me? And one of the cool things about One Touch, besides being really, really rich, is that have you ever received, and I've seen it a few times, and it happens, have you ever received that SMS saying, hey, I see you're trying to log in to widget.com, here's your code. And you go, wait, I didn't ask for a code, what's going on? And you're just freaking out at that point. You don't know what to do, you don't know who to call, you don't know what your next steps are. Well, for your users, if they press that deny button, they can actually send you a positive potential fraud signal that you can act on and figure out what to do depending on what you're trying to solve. So this is one interface where we gave the user full control, and I'll go ahead and approve that, and it'll log me in. Except I waited too long. I talked too long. Sorry. It had a timeline. But here's another one that makes some presumptions. Maybe it uses a stored preference for the user. So let me log into Owl Health here, and this time we see that we sent a push authentication by default. And one of the things I like about showing Owl Health is it's the best spinner we've got in our demo set. We love the syringes. Whenever we show this in the healthcare market, they get a good laugh out of it. We're just going to go ahead and approve that and finish the job. So this is kind of some of the things that you need to be thinking about when you're designing your ongoing user experience. Well, which options are you going to present? In what order? Are you going to lock it down? Are you going to prevent SMS? Are you going to give it as a lower tier solution? Do you want to offer voice? Voice has this global benefit of almost always working, but it also costs a little bit more. So maybe you make it a little harder to get to the voice option. All right, so let's talk a little bit about these channels. If you saw B's session, the previous one to this, he was talking about some of the vulnerabilities in SMS. But they don't go back as far as the vulnerabilities in username and password. And the gist of his argument was, well, users protected by SMS are still, by and large, much more protected than users with no two-factor authentication. So this is kind of a concept we stole from a Gartner presentation I went to a few years ago, where he talked about the varying levels of identity assurance of different forms of two-factor authentication, or different forms of authentication in general. And the password, it's been around for a long time. It used to be more than good enough. And the idea behind this graph is that you might start up here, and slowly as the hackers catch up, it's going to be less and less viable. It's sort of like the race between the authentication providers, the antivirus providers and the virus makers. They're always stepping up their game. You need to stay on top of it. You need to keep focused on two-factor authentication. The password's still good for a lot of things if they don't protect things of value. So news, information access, commenting, games, preferences, things that have a low value but still should be protected or at least identifying for the user, maybe the password's still good enough. But if you've got money or an equivalent of money like a digital good, if you have a commerce site that is actually storing credit cards, if you have people on your site that have reputations to protect or are famous, they are individual targets. You may need to control access, or if you're protecting intellectual property. These are all things that the hackers are trying to get at. And on that fame one, it's useful to recognize that you don't have to treat all of your users the same. You could actually let users choose what level of authentication they want, very common thing to opt in. And you can even maybe force certain users, and we have a lot of customers that do this, they force certain high-value users into using the stronger forms of two-factor authentication. Well, let's talk a little bit about SMS and voice OTP. This was the trajectory we were thinking we were on with SMS and voice, but with some of the recent activity, we've really actually seen that it looks a little more like this. We thought it was going to go a little longer, but we kind of took a nosedive into how long the identity assurance is good for. And I want to tell you, the dates on the bottom are just kind of a guide. There is no specific time when these things happen. I'm just kind of getting an idea across. But there is something, when you use SMS with Authy, you're getting a few other things. It's not just SMS. We're actually managing high-quality routes. We're actually looking at additional data. We're actually doing things like making sure that we're using short codes and alphanumerics, and with the short codes, we're making sure that we're not allowing certain traffic to be logged in online telecom portals. Certain types of SMSs we can kind of control to make sure that they actually make it to a legitimate handset. This additional context and these additional things that we're doing to help is extending the life of SMS, but it's not something that you're going to get if you just generically use an SMS service. TOTP soft token, it's got a longer life. Its primary weakness is a spear phishing attack where somebody makes a site look just like your site, including the two-factor authentication. And then, push auth, it's got a shelf life too. Eventually the hackers are going to catch up, but it's the best thing going right now, and it makes your users happy. But what's really important when you invest in a solution is if you build it yourself, you're going to have to keep up. When you work with Authy, you're going to get that next thing. And that's really important to remember. Good story about one of our customers implemented SMS in 2012. They didn't change any code for years, and yet they got a mobile app, then they got multi-device, they got all of these different features without changing their code, and their users benefited. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the different flows work, just because this is a tech session. So one code is our SMS and voice. It kind of works like this. It works a little different than a raw SMS solution, which is why it's worth pointing out. The user decides to log on to Owlbank. Owlbank is your app. Your app says, hey, this user has two-factor authentication, and tells Authy, hey, I want you to send them an SMS or make a voice call. Authy will then go and initiate that through the Twilio network to the user's registered phone in this case. And the user will read that code off of their phone, type it into your app, and you are going to go and validate that token with us. By using this mechanism, there's a couple of things that are happening. You're really creating an out-of-band authentication solution. You have no idea what the code is. Your employees have no idea what the code is. It just comes back as, hey, was it good or not? So it's a nice separation of channels. But it also gives a, where was I going with that? I can't remember. So let's talk a little bit about the one-touch approval request. Now the user is just working on their phone, and it appears a lot the same to them. I got my phone, all I need is this app. I either get an SMS or a push notification. So they have a pretty easy time with it. You say, hey, the user's logging on, I see they have two-factor auth, can you send them a push authentication? And we prepare that transaction. We notify the various vendors to send the push notification to the phone. But something about this push notification from a security perspective that's worth talking about is that we don't actually send the transaction, that detail across. We send a generic push notification saying, hey, you got an authentication request. And instead, through a direct point-to-point secured SSL tunnel, we're creating a tunnel between the user's specific trusted device and our service to send that transaction information down. And when the user says yes or no, we actually digitally sign that transaction with the private key that has never left that phone. And after that, we send a call back to you saying, hey, user approved it, user denied it, and the user logs on. So just a real quick primer on how the different services work. Now let's talk about just some of the different things that you might need to think about for the ongoing user experience. I know we touched on it a little bit with the live demos. Here's like 4 different ways that you might be able to do it. You saw the Owl Health way. We made a decision based on a stored preference to automatically send a push and then expand the dialog out or provide a link to give the user the other options if that didn't work. In Zesty.io, they just send a one-touch automatically, and if the user doesn't get it because if the user doesn't get it for whatever reason, they can just go into the application and type in the token in that interface. ExoStar here is automatically sending a one-touch. Says, hey, if this isn't the right way, just click X here and enter your token instead. These people are not necessarily backing down to SMS there. One thing that I'd like to point out on the uphold verification is that they're choosing to remember the device for 30 days. And this sounds like, oh, well, there are financial services. Maybe that's not such a good idea on the financial services, just having a username and password, but remember the two-factor. And most of these services end up actually moving their second factor closer to the high-value transactions, only requiring it when they're actually doing something that matters. You might have noticed in your bank that your mobile app doesn't really prompt you to log on unless you're actually trying to do something important. Some of them are even showing balances now before even asking for any authentication. So where and when? You might do this at logon. You might do this for password change, any kind of settings change. You might bring the transaction, even if you do it at logon, you might say remember for 30 days, and then if they try to do something inside the application, at that time, maybe prompt for an authentication. Those are some of the things that you should be thinking about of when and where. So the registration user experience. There's a lot of different things that you can do in the registration experience. There's a lot of different approaches that have been taken. I've got a couple here. The one on the right is the one that Twilio has mocked up as they get ready to expand from a core authentication to including our one-touch capabilities. If you have a Twilio account today and turn on two-factor, you are using Authy. You might be getting an SMS. It's an Authy SMS. You can go download the Authy app and just generate the token instead if you want. Twilio decided to go down a path where the user explicitly selects the mode that they prefer. Now, they all interoperate, but it provides a nice, clean, you don't have to overthink the scenario. They choose which one, and then you walk them through the appropriate steps for that one. If you're authenticating with the app, you want to kind of get them to go download and activate the app. If they're authenticating with SMS, you just gather their phone number and send it on its way. So they're slightly different user experiences, so it's not a bad idea to ask for it. Now this is, I don't even remember which customer did this on the left. Oh, I know, this was one of ExoStar's applications. And they're registering, they're just asking for the phone number and the email address, and they're expecting that you've already downloaded the Authy app. because that's what they're saying. And this is their registration process. You're now registering in this app, but they did a pre-step. Say, go get the Authy app, then we're going to ask for this information and send right away. And now they have a link there, no mobile connection. Even on the registration, they will allow some other ways to get the job done. I wanted to do one step through at this point to talk a little bit about some options that you might have. Now, this is a mock-up. It's not an actual live, so I'm just going to kind of click through some of the things. Secure your account with two-factor. This is another decision that you might need to make. Are you going to do an opt-in solution where users get to choose whether they turn on two-factor authentication? Maybe it's hidden in settings. Maybe you encourage it as they log on. Hey, we got a new feature, two-factor. Do you want to enroll now? You're going to make it an opt-out solution. Kind of say, yeah, you should really set up two-factor, but if you really don't want to, click here. Or are you going to make it a mandatory solution? Or are you going to mix and match it for different types of users? So we'll go ahead and enable 2FA. In this case, we're gathering a phone number, and we're going to talk a little bit about why we need a phone number even for these other solutions, and we'll get back to that. But we're going to type in that phone number. It's good practice to validate that phone number before continuing. We have a lot of different tools available to you. Our phone verification product, the Twilio lookup product. We've got some marketplace products that can really make you feel more comfortable about the phone number that they've provided before you enroll it in an authentication solution. After that, which authentication method? We just saw that. I'm just going to go ahead and authenticate with the app. And they took a really good approach here that takes advantage of some new features that are coming out very shortly for our product. They say download and install the app. And we just sent an install link to that user saying, click here, authy.com/install. You can use that URL yourselves if you want to publish it. It will automatically direct users to the right product store for their platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android. And then we have a new webhook callback that will tell you when the user actually installed and activated an application. So you can actually improve the user experience, keep their focus on the application that they just downloaded and they're activating, and now you can actually send an author request and then finally, waiting for the response, the user presses approve, and they finally get in and they're all set up. So this is one flow that you could take on. We have some new features. This was a one-touch type of flow. Encourage them to download the app. You'd want to encourage them to download the app with TOTP also. You don't have to force them down that route, but depending on which path they choose, maybe you do. All right. 607. That was the demo. Okay, so phone number, collect, validate, and verify. We talked about it. So Authy, as you recall earlier in the conversation, I said we started out with one code, voice and SMS. Of course, we collected the phone number. We need to do that. And we built the rest of our solution kind of expecting that you were expanding on that phone number. You're going to see later this year that we're going to give you options where you won't need to provide a phone number. But today, it's still a core piece of their identity. It's one of the key pieces of information you actually provide to us to help us understand how to interact with the user and how to recover the user. Email address, what for? Today we do ask for an email address. It's not a security channel for us. It's a recovery data point for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about the email address when we actually get to the data recovery of where it actually gets used. For now, let's just set it as an action point. You give us those two pieces of information, and we're going to give you back an Authy ID. Those two first bullets are the only two things you really need to give us today. You take that, you get an Authy ID back, and this is now an attribute that you can store in your user store. We don't know anything about your user's name, their login, their password, none of that. There's no synchronization going on. It's a very loose binding that you'll find is very flexible for you to map this onto any first factor or any other factor. It also allows you to create a solution that's just our second factor, the something you have. User status is a nice thing that we have that can return all sorts of information about the user. Why would you use it? It will give you some context information about the user. It will also tell you if the user has an Authy app installed and activated, and when it was activated, where it was activated, all sorts of great information. But it can help you even make intelligent decisions. Oh, the user doesn't have the Authy app, let's just send them an SMS. Oh, they have the Authy app, let's actually leverage that. And installing the Authy app, as I said, authy.com/install. We're going to send this URL by default unless you change the setting in our console if the user doesn't already have the Authy app. But you could take more control over it and put more of your specific context around it just by sending them an SMS with this URL to the platform of their choice. Or you could even send it out as an email or have it as a link on your web page in case they want to install our Authy desktop app. Can you prevent the use of SMS? A qualified yes. You can turn off that channel entirely for authentication to your application. Today, there is still an SMS activation involved in the very first Authy app. So the first time they install their first Authy app, they have to use SMS. But if they install more than one Authy app, we'll tell you if they've used SMS or if they've used one of the other trusted applications to authorize it. Finally, we have a whole bunch of really cool information coming back to you that is really a channel back from our system to you to let you know when the user is doing things in a self-service fashion in addition to some other events that you can subscribe to. So just something to watch for. I've given you a GitHub that will give you a little bit of insight. The doc is not out yet, and the feature is going to be delivered very shortly, but I think it's really valuable for people that are looking for a full Authy deployment. So user recovery scenarios, I'm so glad that my boss is here to help me make a point. You know how difficult it is to actually get licensed images from the internet that prove your point? It just so happens that my boss posted the perfect poster child for why you need user recovery. This was his phone. I think it was an iPhone 6 that went through the treadmill. And he clearly was not pulling his data off of this phone. Yeah, so if this had been his only device, even with the only device, Authy provides a centralized way to back up and recover all of their tokens. We take a user-centric approach to identity when you use the Authy app, and they're able to pull all of those things back down. If he maintains his phone number, he gets a new phone with the phone number, he can actually go with SMS, activate and reset up the Authy app and pull down all of those tokens. In fact, if you just have a device, maybe his laptop could have had a second copy of Authy. He could have actually come into the Authy app under settings, and because this is a trusted device, that whether this is a desktop or a mobile device, he can actually change his phone number here. We already trust him. We already trust his devices, so it's okay for him to change his phone number. That's a little bit harder to trust when you're talking about just SMS because it's very difficult to determine the legitimate user from a social engineer who's been talking to the phone company. But that ability to self-service is really important. We provide a reset service. It's an optional service that we strongly recommend, especially if you're a small shop. We'll take on some of that fraud control for you so that you can have a better sense of the fact that we're doing the right things to ensure that the second factor remains secure and that it's not being hacked by somebody in Russia. So we give you a walkthrough, and the page that I have up here is actually at this URL on the bottom left here. We're running short on time, so I'm going to speed through. I've got some more reading on user recovery, some of our processes, if you choose to use our processes. One of the things that we use that email for is to send out a request phone change process. When the user is trying to change a phone number, we're going to send out to the registered email address, hey, we see you're trying to change it. And one of the cool things we do throughout this process is artificially slow it down a bit and over-communicate to the legitimate registered user to make sure that they have an opportunity to stop this process. Now, this process is only going to happen if all of those other checkboxes weren't in the cards for them, if they hadn't been proactive or if you hadn't encouraged them to make sure they have maybe an Authy app or more than one. All right, what do we do with that context information? So this is really cool, some of the things that you get back. Every time you verify a token with, from the Authy app, every time the user approves a one-touch request, you're going to get a whole bunch of device information that you can use to further refine whether or not you actually really want to trust this. And one of the cool things is, when was it registered versus what time is it now? Was it a day ago? Was it last year? Last year it's probably all right. Yesterday, well, that's a potential signal for you. And we also will let you dig in using the user status function to pull things like the user agent of that device so that you can get some more information about the device it's installed on. And all of it's tied to a unique device ID, and because we can identify which device a token came from or which device a one-touch request came from, we'll tell you which device actually approved that transaction. And this is great for your audits to say, no, this device approved the transaction. We have the proof. We don't know that the right user was behind that device, but we have a high level of confidence of that device. And I was going to do a demo on just showing that same stuff, but I think I'm going to pass that for now just to make sure I get through my content since we're running light. Error handling. We have at errors.html here, the URL that I've listed here. We actually categorize which of our products and which of our sub-products and channels the errors respond for, so you can figure out which ones you actually may want to consider handling within your implementation. It's a comprehensive list. We have our standard codes like 200 and 401, and then the subcodes that more explicitly identify what the issue is. I strongly encourage that you take a look at it and consider which ones that you think are appropriate to implement for your solution. Testing, how to automate this test. We don't provide a way for that token to be insecurely handled. So you basically need to go get some phone numbers from Twilio or Google Voice or whatever and set up and try to automate being able to do full circle testing. And we've provided some libraries here. GitHub.com/authse is a great resource. It's my team's resource. There's also GitHub.com/authie where you'll find some of the official stuff. Finally, logging. We handle PII very, very tightly. We don't provide PII back in any kind of reporting or logs from us. Your best bet to make sure that you have comprehensive logs is log what you send us and the response that came back from us, and you will have a much more thorough picture of exactly what you have. This would be good for auditing, maybe troubleshooting individual phone numbers, because we're not going to give you back the user's phone number in any of our reports. We do have a reporting interface. It's better serving for understanding how your service is performing and how much you're actually using the service in any given time period. In closing, you want to give users as many options as possible. You want this to be easy. You want them to succeed. We're highly rated in the App Store because we make it easy. Lead with the best UX. Implement One Touch. Implement Soft Token, and fall back to SMS if they don't have those tools. And encourage the users to use an app. All right, thank you. And if you have any further questions, my contact information is in the presentation, and I'll be standing by afterwards. Thanks.